This is Tell Me Exactly. I'm your host, Meridith Jensen. And joining me again today is Brian Dale. Many of you may know Brian, but Brian, please tell us what makes you the expert in the topic that we're going to talk about today. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I started working with Party Dispatch in 1990 as a contractor. My background is a firefighter paramedic for 31 years. I'm retired as a fire chief in Salt Lake City. And our department has done a lot of review of how we respond on medical fire type responses. We've been able to cut our use of license signs by over 48% since 1998. And we're very aware of how agencies might want to look at the data that they have to validate how they send things, how many go ALS, BLS, or on a structure fire versus, smell of smoke and those different type of incidents based on the acuity that the dispatcher picks up on.
Love it. So yeah, definitely a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience in this area. So today we're telling our listeners exactly about assigning field responses to determinant codes and kind of where to start, who should be involved,
right,
and all of the different aspects that go into that.
Okay.
So you've got some pretty impressive stats on how you have affected change on this over the years, which I love to hear that. 49%, I think you said. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with who should really be at the table to start these discussions when it comes to building it from the ground up. It doesn't exist yet.
I think we're going to have to look at this a little bit in silos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for medical, you want the medical director. If you're an EMS officer, EMS chief, district chief, whatever the monikers might be, the people that are overseeing the responses or responsible for the agency's responses should be at the table, and they need to have some understanding as to how the dispatcher got to this 10 Delta 3 or a 101 Charlie 2, whatever the case may be. And once they understand that, then setting some parameters down and saying, okay, if you're looking at a patient who is ill and he's got gout in his left toe and he can't sleep, that probably doesn't need a first response, doesn't need lights and sirens, but patient may need an ambulance. And then if you're looking at how that looks like, they have to go through some, forming, storming, norming type things. They're going to ask a bunch of questions. And do we trust what the dispatcher is doing? And do they trust the system, the party dispatch system? Once you're there, though, dispatch personnel need to be in the room. And that could be a trainer, supervisor, ops or operations manager, something along those lines. And then they're working with those in the agency that are going to decide how many go, when they go, and how they go.
Mm-hmm.
And for fire departments, obviously you want operational chiefs or deputy chiefs or assistants based on the agency. And then you step through that same scenario. And I used to always start the same way. If you have a structure fire in a single family dwelling, which is the most common call we get, what do you send? And they give you their response, 311, 422, whatever it is. And then you start modifications. Okay, if that was a house fire with a hazardous material spill, what would you add to that? And you play with that a little bit, and then they start getting the feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
What I've noticed, and my department was the same way, in medicals and fire, Charlies are the ones that seem to trip people up.
The stuff in the middle.
Yeah, paramedics coming to my office saying, these Charlie calls are stupid. We never go paramedic aboard, or rarely go paramedic aboard. And I'm like, well, yeah, but in those cases, how many times you put on a 12 lead or check a dextrose or listen to breath sounds or do some type of ALS assessment? Well, always. Then the system's doing what it wanted you to do.
That's why it needs to stay at Charlie.
Yeah, it wanted you to evaluate, to say, hey, guess what? You have indigestion today, or gosh, other things going on. I'm going to jump in the ambulance with you.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie calls for fire might be an extinguished fire. I was cooking my famous flambe and I set my kitchen on fire, but I put it out. I just want somebody to come check it, right? So then the agencies have to play with that a little bit. For my department, it was one engine and one truck. The engine goes hot, truck goes cold. Truck's going to be there to ventilate or to remove things or, generally break things if they need to. So that's the ones that have to kind of, some organic process needs to happen, I think, before those become a reality. So
Right. The two ends of the spectrum are the two extremes, right? The low ones and the high ones. I think everybody can kind of really, without too much effort, understand why those are in those categories. The ones in the middle are tricky.
We've done that forever and ever and ever, right? It wasn't that long ago that everything went on everything. So
I want to go back to something that you said, because I think that it's really poignant. You talked about how, somebody having gout in their left toe and they can't sleep, and how we shouldn't be sending a lights and sirens response, or we don't need to send a lights and sirens response to that. Why is that?
Well, when we look at the acuity of the patient for medical or the scene for fire and police, right? There are things where I think there's some basic understanding first. If you live in an urban EMS system and you drive lights and sirens, you are mandated to stop at every stop sign. Mandated. You have to be able to control the speed of your vehicle at every lighted intersection. You're not driving 70 miles an hour down Main Street, right?
Right.
The average time savings, we did this in my department, several others have done it in other areas and found the same thing. The average lights and siren response is going to save you about 35 to 40 seconds.
Right.
The longer you travel, if I live in a rural area, the longer I travel, the less time I save. If I'm have to go through neighborhoods to get to the scene, then going through stop signs, I'm not saving much time at all.
So not only are you not really saving much time, but what are you also doing on the other end of that is causing a pretty significant liability, right?
Right. So if you get involved in an accident driving an emergency vehicle, then you have to then justify the use of those warning devices. And you have to make sure that the law says you have to use both. To be legally be able to run an intersection, you have to move your lights on and your sirens. And you have the real potential to hurt someone. Our rigs, especially in the fire service, are very large, are very heavy, and we're not going to lose many arguments. In my department, when I was younger paramedic, we had 5 accidents in 1 year involving fatalities for citizens. Now, the majority of those were in police chases where the person lost control of the vehicle and hit somebody else. And so Salt Lake City Police and Salt Lake City Fire really started looking at that pretty hard to make some better decisions on our response process. The other thing is, I think people sometimes don't take into account is the wear and tear on these emergency vehicles.
Right.
I tell this story in my classes and things, but the average heavy engine or truck company fire apparatus gets 2 to 4 miles per gallon. 2 to 4.
Oh my gosh.
And we're running those things a lot more than we did back in the day. They were designed to run 1.5 to 2.5 miles to a scene and then go back, that 4-minute response circle, right, around a fire station. And that is expensive. And paying for brakes and tires and fenders on those things is not cheap. And so you're talking about the logistics of managing a fleet of apparatus when they're responding a lot versus responding a little bit more sparingly, and the risk of hurting someone, including your firefighters.
Right.
And the potential that someone could die because that person had gout and called an ambulance.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, it's a safe and sane transport of that patient.
It also has to do with kind of reserving your resources too, right? When you only have a finite number of ambulances, you only have a finite number of paramedics to be able to send to things.
Right.
And if you are sending, everybody, lights and sirens to that gout patient, what happens to that cardiac arrest that comes in on the next call, right? And so that's definitely what this is all about, of course.
You start this domino effect, right?
Yeah.
If you're sending everything on everything, all of a sudden there's zones of your city that are unprotected, to use a blunt term.
Sure.
And if you can keep those resources where they belong, then you have a better opportunity to respond to all calls in a reasonable period of time. And as our system, EMS system, fire system, public safety in general has become everybody's stopgap for most things that go wrong, as it were. And so if it's a smell of smoke in the neighborhood when I came home from work, or my neighbors won't stop that music that I hate, everything in between, here we are. It goes right back to that gout patient. And agencies are constantly telling us they want more specificity in the code system that will let them manage their resources much, much better.
Right.
I think most urban departments are now trying to get away from, it's just easy to send everything on everything. It doesn't have to be, a house fire response. It could be a medical where they're sending the closest BLS fire engine, maybe a medic truck, and an ambulance, right? For a patient who has abdominal pain, they're an 18-year-old male patient with abdominal pain. We know that from our outcomes and from the Academy's ARC data center, we know that patients with these low acuity that we have done millions of times since this thing started by Dr. Clausen in 1979, we know they're stable. And if they're not stable, they're going to be not alert or have abnormal breathing, and we'll manage that differently. But patients who have low acuity should receive an appropriate response, but it shouldn't be something that overwhelms them. I mean, I have dispatchers telling us all the time, Meridith, you have the same thing. Do you have to send the fire department or do you have to come with the lights and sirens on? We work off of the reverse Burger King rule where special orders do upset us. We do it our way. Right. But again, our interrogation sequence allows us to give the code that tells CAD, this is a boo-boo. Let's just send this thing nice, no lights, no siren. The other thing I think people get confused with is, every one of my ambulances is paramedic based. I don't have BLS and ALS. Okay, so for the Alpha and Bravo tier, the agency should look at that ambulance not as a paramedic unit, but a transport unit in their system. That's the transport component of my system. So that would mean that the ALS ambulance is going to respond no lights and no siren because they're functioning at that point as the transport component, not the paramedic component.
They're the taxi to the hospital.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. What would you say to those agencies that have the argument of, we send hot on everything at our agency no matter what, because that's how the group that came together decided 100 years ago that it should be. So why does it matter that we have these levels and different codes?
How much time do we have?
We've got all the time in the world, Brian.
There's a couple of answers. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over, expecting different outcome. Some of it is, quite honestly, tradition, right? You never know until you get there scenario.
Sure.
And I mean, let's face it. I mean, I've driven those big red trucks, lights and sirens. It's kind of fun. I mean, there's some addictive qualities there. But there's no data to support that point of view.
Yes.
I had a fire chief tell me once that their insurance company mandates they drive lights and sirens a certain percentage of the time. And I went, boy, I'd love to see that policy.
Who is that guy that decided that?
Insurance companies are risk adverse. There's no way there's an insurance policy that says that. I've had volunteer fire chiefs tell me that they worry about their members not responding if they can't use the toys, right? They have some agencies with their first responders will have lights and sirens in their private vehicles. And, when you look at that, we can even manage that process in using our coding matrix, right? But the thing is just what people expect us to. Talk to any dispatcher on the planet, they will argue that one with you because they get those comments, as we've already said.
Yeah, the optics of it, right? Like the caller who, even though it's, I don't want to keep going back to the gout example, but a twisted ankle, right? Yeah. Even though it's a twisted ankle, it's an emergency in their world in that moment. Right. And so the fact that, it already feels like to them that it's taking forever for the ambulance to get there. Right. And then they show up quietly and, softly, as it were. The optics of that can be problematic, right? And so we hear that a lot from agencies, that's why we go lights and sirens on everything.
And yet they couldn't support that.
Yeah,
right?
No.
When we stopped using lights and sirens on Bravo calls, it was 1998. And in the first 3 years that we tracked it, in the entire 3 years with Alpha calls going to our transport provider and no fire response at all, we had one complaint from a wealthy person in a very influential part of the city. Woman had a potentially sprained ankle and she was on the stairs, and it took the transport provider 18 minutes to get to the scene. Well, that's not
Which is not unreasonable.
Not unreasonable. That's outside of their contract, but by 3 minutes, right? And but that was it. There were no other complaints of, oh, it took you forever to get here, or oh my gosh. People want help. They don't necessarily, well, my baby's not breathing. I want you here yesterday.
Sure.
If my kid sprained his elbow and my daughter got her foot cut in the railing in my house, I want somebody to come help me. I don't necessarily want you to come lights and sirens and cause a ruckus in my neighborhood. There's just, and as we look at it now, more and more of our larger clients are asking us, help us send the right thing. It doesn't matter if it's a large agency or a medium agency. And some agencies, they have an ambulance, they have a fire truck, and they have a police vehicle. And for those agencies, okay, but my comment is still the same. If you're responding lights and sirens, the longer you travel, the less time you save. And the whole time you're traveling lights and sirens, you're posing a risk to yourself and others on the road.
Yeah. And another thing that you said that I really like that I want to go back to is that when you're looking at, perhaps if you're listening right now and you're fighting this battle or starting this journey at your agency to get away from lights and sirens, hot to everything, is make those decisions based on data, not on the optics or how it feels, or that one call from the mayor whose son was, at a basketball game and twisted his leg and they didn't come lights and sirens and there were hundreds of people around. And how does that make us look? I do like that one question that we have now in the protocol on the fall card that asks about special circumstances. So we have a way to actually even capture things like that. If it's a quote unquote sort of high profile, scene that you want to make sure that people feel that the response is appropriate. You can certainly adjust for that. But that's what I love, making those decisions based on data.
And when agencies go live with our systems, they typically convert our codes in their CAD to what they would send now. Med 1, Med 2, emergent, non-emergent, priority 1, priority 3, whatever the case may be. And then over time, they can then look at the data that they have, right? So, Meridith, you and I were talking before we started about, we looked at structure fire and how many times, 69 Delta 5, which is single family or multiple family, 69 Delta 6, single family dwelling. And I just wanted to see on the INFRS report, the thing that the incident commander fills out, what were the actions taken by the first arriving crews? 49.7% of the time they did something other than investigate. Sometimes it's going to be just ventilate smoke because I was cooking the brisket or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But there was a lot of fire suppression, ventilation, search and rescue, made access, removed hazards. So somebody was smoking in bed and started the mattress on fire. But that tells me the dispatcher's accuracy is very, very good. When someone just drives by and sees smoke from the back of a house and they didn't stop, and a lot of times that will be a dryer vent or someone's barbecue or something. But the accuracy in what we have seen from our dispatchers is very, very good. Obviously, we published studies through the academy on the accuracy of the stroke diagnostic tool, right? Where they potentially identified more stroke patients than paramedics did. So when you're looking at this, there is a lot of accuracy in the system that allows agencies, fire chiefs, EMS directors, medical directors, police chiefs, and others to make good decisions and know that the data is accurate.
Yeah.
If the dispatchers are compliant and the system is working, many agencies are now trying to respond better.
Right.
In the United Kingdom and other places of Europe, they have a lot of stress on their system right now.
Right.
And people may have to wait.
Ambulances,
correct.
Tenfold.
And when they get to the hospital, there's another wait
waiting.
to find time for a patient for a bed. So the accuracy of our system there plays in heavily for those agencies as well. It's not just here in the U.S., it's everywhere. And it's even more poignant, I think, in other areas outside the U.S., and they're using our system to try to alleviate some of those pressures.
Brian, what would you say to people that are listening that maybe don't understand or have a misconception about our codes and how we set up the triaging and think that you have to send lights and sirens to all deltas and you can't send lights and sirens to alphas, or that you have to send the same type of response to all deltas and all alphas? Well,
I think the first step is to look at the code structure, right? An echo is an imminent life threat, and that's across the board.
Yeah.
And a delta is life-threatening. That could be a person with a knife or a gun who's assaulted someone. That could be an active structure fire. That could be a person who is unconscious with abnormal breathing.
Right.
Those are the types of incidents where it's justified and appropriate to send the most appropriate response based on the code structure to manage that incident, right? And it could be multiple disciplines moving as well. So on a shooting call, obviously police officers are coming in, multiple units are responding lights and sirens. If I'm sitting in the front seat of the engine company, I'm not responding lights and sirens,
Right.
because I'm not going to the scene yet.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be one of my worst nightmares, would be to get in an accident driving to a response staging area, lights and sirens, and hurting someone. How do you sit in front of a jury and say, oh, it's okay because whatever?
Because it was
we've
a hot
always
incident.
We've always done it this
they
way.
They didn't need me that way.
So you have to look at each incident and understand that there is an acuity level, right? The seriousness of the event. And if you've spilled 5 gallons of gasoline on the ground and it's just sitting on the cement, there's no reason that you need to have a hazmat or assignment responding, but an engine company or truck company. We all carry kitty litter to soak up that kind of stuff, and probably not best idea to send lights and sirens.
Right.
Now, if that 5 gallons of gas is leaking into a estuary or into a public sewer system, that can cause problems, right?
And that's where the codes get more granular, right?
Correct.
We have thousands of codes
Right.
for a reason.
Right.
Because you don't have to send everything to everything.
Right. But I also think if agencies try to get it right the very first time they try to go through our codes, they're going to get wrapped around the axle multiple times by what you just said.
Right.
The granularity can, oh my gosh, this plus this minus that. Oh, they have to start with something that's reasonable. Right.
And then start grabbing the
and
data.
then you can start looking at the information going, gosh, we're never doing X, Y, and Z. Let's hold back on that response. But we're always calling different resources for this type of incident. Let's, assign something else in addition to.
Right. And I love when I see agencies thinking outside of the box, as it were, sending some of those, like you spoke about stroke, right? We have some agencies that are popping up with specific mobile stroke units.
Yes, I saw
and
one.
so the ability to be able to map that out to send to those types of calls, right? Or add a police officer because the officer has an AED in his trunk and is CPR certified, and in some of those rural areas, they can get there maybe quicker than the ambulance, right?
In many rural areas, a police officer or a state trooper could be the very first person to arrive on scene. And a lot of those agencies carry AEDs for that very reason.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So when you're looking at this, I think the worst thing to do is try to pre-plan everything forever and ever, because you'll never get done.
Right.
Because we keep on changing things over time. And, I would also suggest we have enough subject matter experts in these areas for fire, police, and EMS, where we could certainly schedule some time either remotely or come on site. You sent me to Oregon, to help our friends in Portland look at some of the things that they want to do.
Right.
And we've done similar things, in different parts of the country.
Right.
So the thing that I think that there's some confusion on is that our code becomes something. Why is the CAD code or our determinant code and responses are not the same? What are they? When the agency fills out this table, the CAD table for the responses based on our codes, we're just talking to CAD at that point to assign resources based on what we know of the incident to be, whether it be a burglary or whether it be an unconscious overdose or whether it is a grass fire. Right. So our code says this is the level of acuity or seriousness. The agency then says, and it's never the academy, it's never party dispatch. It's the agency that says, based on this incident description, a wildland fire threatening a structure, I'm going to send 3 engines, 1 truck, 1 chief, and 2 grass wagons. Right. The agency's in control of that.
Yeah, it can never be the academy because we don't know what kind of resources you have available.
Right. We don't know how many toys you got in your toolbox.
Exactly.
We don't know. You got to figure
and
that
they're
out yourself.
all different. I mean, while many of our agencies have a lot of similarities, everybody has their own little unique things that they can tap into.
I do think, though, as we kind of head toward the end here, I think that if you don't inform the people in the street, if you're not communicating with them, This is what we're trying. This is what we're moving towards. This is what it's going to look like. This is what you're going to do. We created a generic response policy that said alphas and bravos are no lights, no sirens. Alpha is transport only. Bravo is closest BLS engine company. Charlie is ALS hot, transport cold. Delta, y'all come, right? But we also allow the officer in charge of those apparatus to say, I'm coming from training, and the call is on the other side of my district. I'm responding lights and sirens on this Bravo call. Right. And we've always allowed people to do that. But you also have to have some ownership. This is not a life threat call. You're doing it because of traffic. The Jazz game just let out, or we've got a parade blocking our path, right? Those are some of those parameters that agencies need to plan for. But if the responders don't know and all of a sudden you're telling them to respond, no lights and no siren, that's going to cause immediate friction. There's actually a term for it. It's called field force resistance. Fancy term.
Yep.
But if you're communicating with them and they have some say through DRC or other venues where the field can, hey, we don't like going no lights and no sirens on X number of these types of calls, right? And that way you can work through those issues and it doesn't become a you versus them.
Right. If they can understand the why behind it, you're going to get...
And the dispatchers aren't making the decision. They never made the decision in CAD.
Right.
The agencies, administrative authorities are making those response assignments. The dispatchers just providing the code to our software, which talks to CAD and says, send that, right? And I was very surprised in my department where I was the sacrificial lamb to go to the captain's meetings and tell the captains to respond no lights and no sirens starting January 1st. And I had a very senior, very crusty captain say to me, it's about time. And I'm like, what? And he goes, we've all known these man down calls and these boo-boo calls they're not life-threatening, and yet we're putting our firefighters at risk. And this is back in the tailboard days,
right,
not as protected. And he said, we all know it. Let's just make it right.
Right.
And so I think the field responders are getting to a sense where they're feeling fatigued. They're feeling, the call volumes are going up so dramatically in some areas that they need some assistance. And I think this is one of the things we can do, keep everybody safe as well.
Sure. And the agencies that are new to doing this, the great thing is that we have a ton of data to help them where they don't, right? If they're just starting out and they don't have the data to know, what to be looking for, we've got a ton of data that's being shared from hundreds of agencies.
Sure. Yeah. And the thing that made an impact for me, I guess, is the fact that I could connect the dispatch code to the EPCR, right, to the patient care report that the paramedics are filling out. And when we've completed the National Fire Incident Report System, or NFIRS, we put it into our records management system, which means I can pull the dispatch code and I can pull actions taken, type of event, and I can compare to see where we were doing it correctly or if we may have missed something on some of these calls. And I was consistently impressed with when the dispatcher said it wasn't something, I look on the actions taken, investigation only, canceled on arrival. Those are the things that are telling me this is good. If I have a boo-boo, if I have the hurt knee or the painful elbow, and I see the patient's transport of lights and siren,
we missed something.
What's going on? Or was it just pain management?
Sure.
Was it an IV in pain management? That's not truly an ALS thing. I get patient comfort and stuff. But again, we can look at these things and say, is it the system or is it the paramedic or was it the patient or what was going on with those kind of scenes? But they can do that themselves. If you have those capabilities and you have the people with propellers in their heads that can look at data for you, that's great. If you can't, the academy can provide you with some assistance, at least on the dispatch side, right? You still have to be able to connect your patient, your records, wherever those records are, with our codes. But many agencies are now getting the ability to do that with AI or Power BI, those kinds of things, and connecting those dots. So
love it. What would you tell our listeners then, Brian, as their main takeaway from this episode? This has been fantastic.
I think when EMD first started, we focused a lot on the instructions we were giving, right? And the first responder, the first incident commander. And I think all those are true and have always been so. But I think the other thing that's becoming apparent in the dynamic change of public safety is the dispatcher's impact on resource allocation, as they call it, right? And the ability to hold back resources for the right type of calls. And again, we're not gatekeeping the public We are maintaining the resources throughout an entire region, a response region, and we're making sure those people who call with certain incident types or with all incident types get the most appropriate response. I think people that get a non-licensed siren response are appreciative of that because they're not waking their neighbors at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And Lord knows when you've got a bad call, here we come. And, that's also nice to hear. My baby's not breathing. I can hear the sirens. And the dispatcher's telling me how to do CPR. But this is yet another way the emergency dispatcher has the ability to make a very positive impact on their community.
Yeah, and hopefully we're making that impact before it's driven by a bad outcome or some kind of catalyst.
I'm hoping that we can, what's the old saying? The best defense against extinction is evolution, right? And I think that we have a capability of doing that. I think the dispatch system in general is much better managed now. We have better tools than we've ever had. I mean, when I dispatched, we had punch cards and magnets, man. I mean, telling you. But now that we have the newer technologies and we have the system as complex, as it were, as ours, and having the ability to give all these instructions and to interrogate a caller enough to know that this is high acuity, medium in the middle, as we talked about, or low acuity for all three disciplines, right? Mm-hmm. And now we have the ability also to send that low acuity medical call over to a nurse practitioner, right? A nurse in the comm center. So the ECN is another cog in our wheel that we look at. And I think as we go down the road, when we're looking at other systems in the United Kingdom or Australia or Europe that are so overtaxed, they're moving down that road faster than we are.
Faster than we are, yeah.
So I think we'll have a lot more things to come. Mm-hmm. But again, the dispatcher does have the ability, using a system like this, to make those specificity requirements and make the impact like we have always been able to. But now we're getting buy-in also from many more response departments that want to manage their resources more intelligently.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, Brian. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Meridith. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to let us know what you liked and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Look for @TellMeExactly to get the latest on all things emergency communications. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast developed by our team of protocol experts and hosted by me, Meridith Jensen, with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, Scott Robinson and Jason Barber as executive producers.